Here we go, back again on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. So excited that you would join us today. And these are some of my favorite episodes every year now. This will be year number 3. We're in year number 4 for the podcast. But about 3 years ago, we started interviewing the USTFCCCA boys and girls National Coaches of the Year National Coaches of the Year. That has been a lot of fun. We have had some amazing people on the podcast for that. And I'm super excited. We're doing it again. And today we're starting with the girls, the USTFCCCA Girls Coach of the Year. Remember, this award is presented by the U.S. Marines. Shout out to them. Really appreciate their support of this amazing award. Appreciate USTFCCCA doing this award and administrating. It's not an easy task. They have Coaches of the Year for each state, for boys and girls, and then really an impossible task, the National Coach of the Year. And we're super excited to have the Girls Coach of the Year here from Los Alamos High School, the Hilltoppers out in New Mexico. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Mr. Ernest Martinez. Ernest, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, man. Hey, so have you come off the high of being named the National? I mean, I know you probably have a lot of pride in winning a state Coach of the Year. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. But to go up against the other 50, right? The other 50 states in the, I think, District of Columbia has their own as well. That's a big deal, my friend.
Yes, I do try not to get caught up in a lot of accolades and try not to, base success or failures, I guess you could say, based on those things. But, it definitely has sunk in a little bit that it's definitely an awesome honor. I mean, one of the big things for me too is to be the first New Mexican to ever win the award, and so that was very rewarding and special to represent New Mexico and a lot of the great coaches and hardworking individuals that grind it out here. So definitely a huge honor for sure.
So you're not walking around. You didn't put the award like on a big chain, like Flavor Flav. You're not doing that kind of style.
Not yet. Not yet. No, I don't. It's not really my style, but yes, definitely. Maybe have to think about putting that one on a big gold chain.
Never say never. That's good. That's a sign of a good coach and good teacher right there. I love it. Well, we're going to talk about this really magical year for you and what led up to the award. Try to learn as much as we can from you for our listeners and just see what kind of stew you got to put together to make something like this happen. But let's start with you. Let's talk about your coaching, how you got into coaching, maybe your athletic background. Where does coaching and coaching track and field start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I joke around with people that, my birthday's in May, and I joke around that I haven't had a birthday, since, until I can't remember, without giving away too much of that. But it's something that is, since I was in high school, has been a huge part of my life. Running in high school and then getting to go run collegiately and at a Division I level, and that was pretty remarkable in a sense for me, and it just kind of fueled that idea that track and field has a huge part of my life. And whether it's extremely stressful or it's long, as a coach you put in a lot of long hours, and it's a thankless job at many times, but it's something that is a center to my life for sure. Yeah.
So are you from New Mexico originally?
Yes, I graduated from Taos High School, which is, and ironically, the school I'm coaching for now, Los Alamos, they were a rival in a sense, so pretty close to there. But I ran and graduated from Taos High School in New Mexico, and then I went out to college in Oklahoma to Oral Roberts University. So that's where I competed collegiately. I got recruited to go out there, and on that note, talking about influences, is that I was really blessed in a sense to land there. I mean, I think athletes, I know we talk about it with coaches a lot, is we always hear, oh, D1, and that's the mindset, right? Everyone wants to go and play for these large, huge schools and have these huge experiences. But I feel like I was blessed, because for me, coming from a smaller town in New Mexico, and it took me a while to get going. I didn't have a lot of the technique and the coaching that I would say that I would have liked in high school, and I had great influences, and the people that impacted me as a high school athlete definitely left their mark. But from a technical standpoint and a really, nuts and bolts of training, I was a little bit underprepared. I was a good athlete, but when I went to college, I was impacted by a few coaches who really kind of laid the groundwork for me, and how I would say about how I am now coaching, and maybe not so much X's and O's, but just how to interact with athletes and with young adults, and really, forging, relationships first, and then also, maximizing athletic potential. So yeah, I mean, it's been a long journey. I don't say that I'm really old, but I do sometimes feel like I've been in the sport for a very long time.
Well, we love talking about mentors, especially track coaches, right? Because that's what you're doing in today's role as a high school track and field coach. And you have certainly been influenced by your high school coaches, your college coaches, and Oral Roberts. What a great little school. I mean, it really is awesome. What's fun is you are actually the second Oral Roberts alum this year on the podcast. So this little school in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, has now had 2 alums. Rachel Andrus, discus thrower now up in Canada, was on the podcast earlier this year. So that's shocking to me.
I went to school with Rachel, and so we were competing at the same time, yeah, or roughly the same time. And it's amazing. We had a lot of All-Americans, and our team. I don't know if Rachel. I think Rachel was a couple years younger, so she came after. But we had conference titles, and a lot of us that were national qualifiers, and I was fortunate to win many conference titles and compete on those teams, and so it was just a really awesome time. And I think that's kind of what I was alluding to with Division I, is that people don't hear it. They don't hear that school, maybe it's doesn't ring, that it's a powerhouse, but you can have these, what I would say, high level athletes that are competing, with these top schools in Division I, and really, I feel like we really made a mark in terms of what we were doing, and got to compete with some of the best athletes that competed, internationally, or, and beyond.
So before we get to Oral Roberts, let's take a step back to the high school side. What was relationship like? Names? Can you think of and describe some of the mentors you had in high school that helped develop you? Because eventually you had to figure out where you wanted to go to school, and we'll talk about how you chose Oral Roberts and what you ended up majoring in a second. But what was your experience like with your high school coaches?
Sure. And so, like I said before, I feel like the individuals I had, that were influencing me in track and field in smaller towns, as many people know, like, you're going to have coaches who may be a football coach, who also coaches track and field, or your basketball coach that coaches track and field, and or vice versa, or other combinations of sports. And so, I do feel like we've had, from my hometown in Taos, we've always had amazing athletes. And I feel like for me, my experience was that I felt like I was trained, to be tough and resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I alluded to earlier, but not having necessarily maybe the technical, prowess of a coach who was really pouring into me in that way. I had a few individuals of, our head coach of track and field coach at the time was James Branch, and a man that I actually coached with when I came back to Taos, because I returned to Taos when I left college, and I coached there first, and so Benny Mitchell and a few other coaches there. But ironically, a funny story was, a coach named Robert Trujillo was a coach that was my middle school coach, and I think I look back at my journey, and it could have ended there, because I remember one day for practice, it was like the first year I ever did track and field, and it was hard, and I was going through some growing pains. I was stretching out, and everything hurts, and I remember coming to my coach and telling him that I didn't think I was going to be able to run anymore, and in essence trying to cop out and quit. And his response was kind of nonchalant, and was like, well, if that's what you want to do, if you want to take the easy way out, and if you want to, it was a turning point for me. I think I definitely decided at that moment, by his response, that I didn't like the way that sounded. and I'm not saying that he disparaged me or made me feel really bad. I really just thought that I was going to have a different response, and it made me think twice about what I was doing. And, I look at that moment as a moment where I said, not only am I going to continue, is that I'm going to be a kind of a tough-nosed kind of person and really kind of get after it. So, those influences started at the middle school level.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, because I think you're right about, it's not, the way coach said that was not disparaging. Disparaging is, oh, Ernest, of course you're quitting. You're a loser. You're weak, whatever. That's disparaging. But we're talking about kids. I mean, right now you deal with, 14 to 18-year-old kids. You were talking about a middle school. So, 11 to 13. I have a 7th grader. So I'm right in the pocket with this. When you talk about, growing pains, I'm like, oh yeah, my kid, poor guy. And I remember my own experiences as well with that. But we're dealing with little kids, little minds that are still growing, still figuring out the world. Well, we need adults, we need coaches who are going to help us. And so a coach who says, I like that. It was a little needle, right? Like, oh, okay. If you want to take the easy way out, it was a little lesson of like, hey, there's going to be times when things are hard, and you can either quit or keep working and work hard and put your nose to the grindstone. You're going to have more success when you do the latter, by the way. That was his way of kind of just like, hey man, if that's your choice, that's cool. I'm not here to force you, but just know you are taking the easy way out by not even really trying. And that obviously has stuck with you from that moment on. I love that. That kind of interaction, that positive impact that coaches are making on young people happens every day. And I love to hear a real world example of that.
Yeah, I mean, and when I moved into kind of started that feeling where working hard is okay, and that's something that I say I wanted to maybe get rid of track, but my family and my immediate circle is we a very hardworking background, and so it wasn't like it was new to me, but it translated into track and field specifically, and moving into high school, is like I talked about earlier, those coaches. They really, we were tough. We were tough. I feel like some of the workouts, we look back and I say, would I do those workouts? Maybe not the best timing or whatever. But I look back and I say, well, we were strong, we were tough, and we survived that, those kind of workouts. And, it really laid the groundwork for me moving forward into college, where, you have to have that mentality, because you're not going to be the most talented person. And, there's always someone faster, and stronger and more talented. But you can work hard. And I think that is something that really, really paid dividends as I moved through high school and into college, for sure.
Hey, listen, no judgment for any high school coach, even a high school coach today. Your high school coaches certainly didn't have the advantages you have today in regards to coaching education, right? As far it's pretty hard today to not be able to find a course or a book or a person to bounce ideas, a clinic to bounce ideas and have some coaching education going on. However, even saying that, you're still a high school teacher. And what I mean by that is you're still teaching 6, 7, 8 hours a day. You still have a family. You still have other passions. You're the overseer of a club. It's not just track for you. I have a little bit more pressure for a college coach who's a full-time college coach. It's like, hey man, I know there's other things you have to do as a college coach as well, recruiting and paperwork and all that kind of stuff, but your job is the coach. So I expect you to really be honed in on coaching education. A high school teacher, man, it's as much passion as you pour into coaching track and field and your high school coaches poured into coaching track and field. It's still a small part of their overall life. So, that they didn't maybe know the X's and O's as well as either you do today or whatever the, classify good high school track coach should. They were doing the best they could and definitely instilled the love of the sport and the toughness of the sport into you. I love that.
A lot of love of the sport. I feel like some of those coaches that I mentioned, and as along with there was a Bruce Gomez at the time as a cross country coach. There was a lot of love for the sport and a lot of investment. I can remember, probably not a great idea to write it out, but as a middle schooler, I remember our middle school coach once again saying, like, "What are you guys doing this weekend? Do you want to go travel to the high school meet?" And we went a group of us, the upper level middle school kids would go to the meet. And in other states where you have a really large metro area, you can have a track meet in Phoenix, right? And you have track meets in Phoenix every week, and there's a big track meet, you can do it. But in New Mexico, it's not that way. When you're in your district, you can drive 45 an hour, 75 minutes just to go to a school, and that's where the meet. And those other schools are coming from different areas, and so it's not just, oh, you want to see a track meet, oh, you can just pop over 5 minutes and go watch a track meet. It's an effort, and so having a coach like that saying, I'm going to take you guys on my own time, you're not getting paid a lot, but I'm going to go over there and I'm going to take you guys over there so you can just see some of these good athletes and see this upper level track and field, and those kind of things were extremely inspiring. And moving into high school, the coaches that I had there is they were extremely invested in our interest in it, and trying to get us prepared physically to go out and be successful and succeed. Yeah,
helping to envision what's possible. I like that. That's like, and doing it on their own time. You're right, they didn't have to do that at all. They could have been watching college football or whatever on the weekends, and lesson planning.
And we can get into about Taos and our history where I coached before, when we kind of moved that way. But there was some amazing athletes that I looked up to during that time, as a young middle school athlete. And I looked up, and Taco, we used to call him, or Ben Ortega, who went and ran, I think it's All-American for UNM. Those guys were Taos alums, and to see some of them at that level, and they were just these big athletes that were just for us younger kids, they were intimidating but also inspiring. And you kind of look at your own times and you say, oh, well, I ran this in the hurdles. Well, now you go see these kids and these bigger kids. It's always that evolution of having that someone to look up to, and having that respect, and just being excited about what the journey can be if you follow that a path that's dedicated to track and field.
Well, we definitely want to talk about New Mexico and Taos, specifically history, because I'm always amazed at New Mexico track history. New Mexico is not one of our most populated states like a California, Florida, Texas, etc. But the track and field history that has come out of that state is it's unbelievable to me. I mean, when I first started learning, when I used to go to the New Mexico high school track coaches clinic and started learning, like who's in the Hall of Fame, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I know this person. Like, holy cow. So let's get into that. First, though, as you're going through high school, we know you went to Oral Roberts, but what was your mind frame as you're looking at school to go to college for career? Did you want to be a business person? Did you want to be a fireman? What did you think as going into college you were going to be professionally?
Yeah, honestly, I think that's why it's so important for athletes to have coaches and school officials who are very involved in what's going on and helping guide that. I think that's great. Not to say that I didn't have that in school, but for me, my parents didn't attend college, and so you're navigating that space of what it's going to be like. Where do I want to go to school? Do I even want to run? Do I even want to compete? Is this something that I want to do? And so honestly, for me, I could say, without being too ashamed of it, I just was kind of along for the ride. I was going wherever I felt like it was going to be a great experience for me. And then getting to college and being there, I did have interests of where I wanted to go, but I kind of was like really just wanting to feel it out. I was just going with the flow. I do, in hindsight, wish I had a little bit more, focused direction of what I wanted to do. But, I also think that that's some of the lessons that we can teach our younger kids, and is that I also feel like I got caught up in, just really wanting to be that collegiate athlete. I think that many of us that are, wanting to go and run at the collegiate level or Division I, especially, is you're just so excited to be part of something that's big and getting paid, getting your schooling paid to go and do this. And you definitely make it everything, which you need to, you have to commit to it. It's a behemoth, you're like, well, my first meet is going to be at Arkansas, and I'm just this guy.
Holy crap.
And you're going to run against the NCAA Division I champion reigning, it's like this feeling that it's this looming and it's there, and your coaches do a good job of putting you there. But for me, I've started to coach and starting to try and put in your athletes' minds that, from my own experiences, you're getting to college and you're trying to prepare them that this is huge and this is awesome, but it's also just one part of your puzzle, and trying to promote the beginning stages of balance, of what that means, so.
And
yeah.
you end up going to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, Tulsa to me is one of the, like, I don't want to call it hidden gem because everybody knows of Tulsa, but it's not a Dallas or a Phoenix. But man, Tulsa, my very, very good friend used to coach at the University of Tulsa. So I got to go to Tulsa quite often. And I used to coach just an hour and so north of it over the Kansas border. So I love Tulsa. Oral Roberts is like this little oasis of its own. It's its own little thing there that they do a great job there. And you mentioned the impact that your coaches there made on you. I hope that starts with my good friend Joe Dial and his wife Shauna.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Coach Dial, I mean, the first experience I had was at the Great Southwest Track and Field Classic, and I met who was my immediate coach, which his name is Chris Brown. And so going into that place and visiting Oklahoma, and for me, I'm a mountain boy, and I love the mountains. I love skiing and hiking and all that stuff. And so Oklahoma was a little leery about what that was going to be. But you're right, it's beautiful. It's hilly, it's green, there's a lot of water, there's a lot of great things out there. And so, to go out there and to meet, that team, it was kind of a perfect storm in a sense as well, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe that our school had restrictions on scholarships prior to me coming in, and then my freshman year it opened up, just the way everything opened up, and it was just a great recruiting class. We just had an amazing team. We had team members from the Bahamas and Jamaica and all over the place, and really amazing athletes and distance runners from different parts of Africa, Zimbabwe and Kenya and Uganda and all these great places. And so it was just this feeling of like a lot of new faces and talented athletes, and but guiding the helm was, like you said, our friend Joe Dial, and I still have a good relationship. We still try and talk on the phone a little bit. I've even tried to send some of our kids up to vault it, when he's there during the summers. And I really respect Coach Dial and his wife Shauna and Chris Brown. And like I said, it was the beginning of how to see coaches who are incorporating all facets of your life to try and mold you into the best athlete that you can be, for sure.
Yeah, Joe was as you know, was a pretty good vaulter, right? Really good vaulter, and vaulted with our CEO, David Hodge. And so through their friendship, I got to know Joe and visit campus and hang out and do some work with him on the new track facility and everything. And just, just great people, him and his wife. He's always had great assistants that have fit the mold of what he created there. And just always, you can't help but have a smile on your face when you're talking to Joe Dial. He has some amazing stories. He's full of energy, and I can't imagine what it's like to be coached by him. I know Chris was your direct coach, but you still had rah-rah speeches from Joe before meets and conference and things like that. I can't imagine what that's like.
Well, so my background is I became a multi-event athlete. I was a decathlete, and so my strengths coming out of high school were high jump and kind of the quarter and hurdles. And so that was the foundation for my career. And that's what we kind of started with. But anyone knows the decathlon or multi, you have to vault. So Coach Dial, although he's the head coach, he's also, I spent a lot of time with him because you have to learn how to vault. And so I had never even touched a pole, when I got to college, and that shows you the level of coaching and then how much he's been around, where he he took me from someone who I never touched a pole until I got to college, and I ended up, got to the point where I was, podiuming at conference, and I became conference champion in pole vault. And so it's something that it speaks to that. I always love it. And sometimes people will ask me, and they're like, you're coaching the vault, and these little things that you're saying, and they make a big difference. And that's a direct result of being around Coach Dower. I mean, I know there's times where you'd see him and he would say something, as the vaulter's running down the runway, and he saw what was going to happen before it happened. I mean, the background and how much vault the man has seen in his life is just unbelievable. It's I think it's the first high school over 18, first collegiate man over 19. I mean, just, you think about it being such a long time ago, but the level they're vaulting at with the materials and the equipment, so there's a lot of respect that comes with that too. And I think that's a big thing is there's this, you go to his house and you have these medals from Europe, or you have this sense of this grandiose sense of who it is. And it's not everything, but it does help with this feeling of trust, that person has your best interest in mind, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's quite impressive, not vaulting at all, to becoming a conference medalist in the vault. And you're a decathlete, so you could have all excuses of like, yeah, I cleared a bar, so I could do the other 8 events, and then struggled with the 15. That'd be the typical decathlete. But I knew there was something special about you when you said you were a multi-eventer. We love decathletes around here. Come on, man, that's awesome. I love to hear that.
And Coach Brown, I think he definitely, I would say, is one of the most direct influences in my coaching style, because one thing I realized from him, and I think in my experience prior to that, was you have coaches and they're very true to themselves, and I think you can be very successful that way. And you have a coaching style that you have, and you kind of just, you have a coach. You're the coach. This is your style, and athletes have to kind of acquiesce to that in a sense. And I think you can be successful with that. But what I learned from Coach Brown was, he treated us athletes differently. I would say fair, but not always, equal in a sense. And I think that's very important, especially when you're coaching people from diverse backgrounds and different upbringings and different levels of athletic ability. When you're in high school, especially, is that, what's great for Tommy might not be great for Timmy. And those are actually Coach Dow's sons' names.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But what's great for one may not be great for the other. And it was my first exposure to that with Coach Brown, where he was, I had a friend, and I mean, Coach Brown could, not officially, but he could smack me if I was freaking out. He could smack me. He could really get in my face, and that's something that I could respond well. But maybe there's another athlete that he knew he wouldn't speak to in such a strong way, because they would shut down. And so those things sound very, there's nothing really profound about that, but it's surprising to see how many, how hard it is, or how many coaches aren't able to do that, where you're able to balance that. And it's also more time consuming, and it's hard. It's easy to show up to practice, right? And just blanket statement things and just get in or get out. But when you start taking the time to have individualized plans, not only from a training perspective, but from an approach perspective, those are some of the foundational pieces that was imparted to me by those coaches, for sure.
We're starting to understand why you got named National Coach of the Year here, because you're exactly right. It's easy. You nailed it. It's easy when you're dealing with a group of 10, 20, 30, whatever amount of kids are in your group, to treat them as one. But those 10, 20, 30 people are individuals. You nailed it. And that is, I saw something the other day on Twitter. It was talking about, the X's and O's are less important than the culture you build with the individuals. And I was like, oh man, that's right. Like, and you always hear about, coaches who have the kids, like they believe in them so much they'd run through the wall if that was what it took to become a better vaulter. The coach don't know that much about vaulting, but boy, he has got them whipped into a lather of what it takes to be a good vaulter or a good athlete. And so they follow him blindly almost in that context. But that means that person knows them individually, not just, okay, I'm going to say this one thing for everybody, and you better get on board. And if you don't, oh well, I'm not going to change for you. I'm not going to say something differently. I think you hit that nail on the head. That's perfect. as you're going through Oral Roberts, you become a multi-athlete, which is really, I don't want to say key, because there are plenty of amazing coaches who were single eventers, vaulters or sprinters, et cetera. But boy, when you're a decathlete, you get a taste of everything. It's that buffet of coaching the entire team. Where was coaching in your mind at this point? Are you thinking like, oh yeah, I'm a multi and I'm majoring in maybe education. I'm definitely going to be a coach when I graduate. Where was coaching at all for you as a career?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely not, objectively, it was not on the radar. But my first response is to say that it wasn't on the radar. But then, as you're talking about that, when you're an athlete like that and you're competing, collegiately in that sense, and you have a great coach, but a lot of times, you're in a situation where, especially coming from a small school, where that coach can't be everywhere. It's you're over at Texas Relays, and there's someone at the long jump pit, and someone's vaulting, and someone's doing this or whatever. And so you learn as an athlete to help each other out, and you learn as an athlete, especially even in the field and the technical events, where you're the eyes, and so we have one of our female athletes who's long jumping, and I'm not doing anything for another couple hours, and you're there and you're supporting, you're catching steps, you're recording, you're doing these things. And because you're starting to accrue this knowledge base of it, you can become very helpful, and you do have that mindset where it starts turning to say, well, yeah, this is something that I enjoy, but also I do see this. I see this in real time. Sometimes there's just people who can't see it. A long jump will happen, and it's kind of, even if they're an amazing long jumper, they won't see it. They won't see what objective. What are the next steps, or what is the first thing that we need to talk about? And so I think that was where those little experiences where you're working with your teammates and helping them out, where those kind of seeds started to be sown.
Yeah, we had our teammate Dean Jordan here at Gill Athletics on the podcast, who coached before he came here, and it was interesting. The same thing. He was helping out his in high school, helping out the better long jumper on his team at the state meet. Coach had to be somewhere else, high jump or something, and he remembered Coach said something about, I don't remember if it was the penultimate or whatever, and he helped his teammates, same age, 18-year-old kids, and the kid ended up winning state. And he's like, man, he goes, I had done some cool things, like I'd won some awards and set some records and all that kind of stuff up to that point in my career. He goes, but nothing made me feel as good when I helped my buddy, my teammate, do better and win the state title. And he goes, I think that's when coaching was like, oh, he goes, he couldn't verbalize, a little bit like you're explaining here. He goes, I couldn't verbalize and say, oh yeah, I want to be a coach. But it was like, oh man, that felt good. And why? Because I'm 18 years old. I'm supposed to be selfish. It's supposed to be about me. Why am I not out there winning the state title? Why did that feel good? So I like how you're processing becoming a coach through an athlete by the help that you're helping your other teammates. And as a multi, you're able to do that in a lot of different events, not just long jump. You're watching hurdles, pole vault, shot put even.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you're out there and you're exposed to, especially on a team where you had a lot of great athletes, is that you're high jumping with great athletes that are high jumpers. You're throwing with athletes who are good throwers, and you're doing these types of things, and maybe you are just as good as them in one event, but for the most part, as a rule, decathletes, you may not be the best in the world at one event, but you're very strong across the board. But as you start gaining, moving up the ranks, well, sometimes you can have a really bad event or two or three, but the higher you want to go, you have to realize that you can't really have those events. And maybe what you view as your best event is no longer you're no longer just smashing it and smashing everyone in that event. Like you're like, oh, I jumped 6'10". Okay. Yeah, I'm crushing it for a decathlete. Well, now you start getting in the upper ranks and you're like, there's a lot of guys jumping over, 205 or whatnot, or pole vault. You're like, oh, I'm a good pole vaulter for a decathlete, and then we're jumping over 17 feet, and there's just this feeling that it's growing. But I think you hit the nail on the head for me, and I always go back to that. Is I do feel multi-event training for me it just set me up to be successful as a coach, because you do have that background, in such a wide variety of events.
And I gotta, we're talking about decathletes, so I gotta make two plugs here real quick. One is Harry Mara, one of the greatest decathlon coaches we've had in this, almost in this country, in this world. First, Gill Podcast alum. Go back. He's one of the OGs. I think he was episode like 25. We're on 200 and something. And he was 25. He actually did a 3-part series. So whatever app you're listening to now, go back, just search Harry Mara, Gill Athletics. It'll bring it up. Quite amazing what he did. But he also recently wrote a book that you got to go check it out on Amazon, Tales from the Passenger Seat. It's awesome. It's kind of Harry's like, Tales from the Passenger Seat. He's along the ride on a Bree in Ashton, Eaton, and many other decathletes that he's had. It's a fantastic book. And then just recently, I also read Dan Steele, another amazing decathlete we had here in America, who was a medalist in the bobsled. It's awesome. American Steel by Dan Steele. I got to pub those 2 books. You got to go check them out. Highly recommend them. They're awesome. They did an amazing job. We need more people pouring their stories into written form as well, like a Dan Steele and a Harry Mara. So I'm proud of them for taking the time and energy to write those books. And I think you would be better by reading them as well. So go check them out on Amazon. Harry Mara, Tales from the Passenger Seat, and Dan Steele, American Steel. That's my book club. I love reading. So I love when people send me books, and those were quite amazing. So you're not really, not everybody. This is what I love about the podcast here, the Connections podcast, is everybody's journey is unique. It's not the same. It's not everybody went to college because hell or high water, they were going to become a track coach. Heck, we've had many coaches who became accountants first and marketing directors, and then came back around to coaching track and field. It doesn't seem like your heart was on fire to become a track coach. What are you majoring in, and what did you end up getting a degree and doing?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the malleability of being a young athlete. I started off majoring in chemistry. I was going to go into forensics. I wanted to go into forensic science. And, as a young athlete, and this isn't any coaches putting the pressure or whatnot, but I started having labs that were happening right during track practice, and like I said, for my journey, coming in, I ended up becoming very successful in college as well. But initially, I was strong and I worked out well, but just pure talent-wise, I was a little bit, what I would say, a little bit behind of where I wanted to be compared to some of these, freshman All-Americans that were coming in or competing at these levels. And so my mindset was like, I need to go buy in more, and it just needs to be everything. And so, the coach was saying, okay, well, you can train at another time apart from your teammates and go to your lab. And that'll work those days of the week. And as for me as an athlete, I'm saying no, because I'm going to fall behind. I'm not with the group. This is not what I signed up for. And so decided, and I changed my major and went to behavioral sciences, and that's what's in the end, that's what I ended up getting my bachelor's in. It's something it was very interesting to me, and it's something that I enjoy, but it's back to what we were saying, where I do feel like, looking back, I wish I had a little bit more balance in terms of what I was seeing from me. And that kind of leads me to where coaching came in, where track ends for everybody. And from a competing standpoint, track will end. It's going to end for everybody, from Noah Lyles, who's on the tear now, to someone who goes through their 8th grade year. It's going to end at some point. And being okay with that is something that, or at least understanding that is something that's very healthy. And I feel like for me, it was something that I didn't necessarily balance as well, because my indoor season, my senior year, I had a great year, and I qualified for nationals and set school record and conference record. And your mind always goes to what's next. You set a record and you're not really happy, because you're just saying, okay, well, that's great. Now, what's next? Like, that was great. That was a great mark. I could have won the SEC with that, or, but then you're like, oh, but I wasn't an All-American this year. and I wasn't All-American, so I need to go here. And so you just keep raising the bar for yourself. And for me, it was kind of an anticlimactic end to my collegiate career where, I mean, I had success outdoors that my senior year, but I had some injuries and it kind of plateaued in a sense like that. And so once, fast forwarding to when track ended, for me from a competition standpoint, I was a little bitter. I didn't want to be around track and field initially right away, in those things, because I see my friends who are still competing, and for you can't help to have this selfish thing where you're saying, like, I didn't envision it ending like this for me. I envisioned myself going to the trials and competing for the spot there. You envision yourself moving up and having all these successes, and I'm not saying that you're being delusional, you just have no end in sight, but there's these hopes and dreams that you always feel like it's going to be there for you. And so when it ended, I was a little distant from track and field in a sense. Like
sorry, I want to interrupt because I'm curious about what you said there. It's interesting where you talked about like the what's next, and even if you PR, right? And I think all good to great athletes have that, right? If they hit 7 meters in the long jump, it's like, okay, well, how do I get to 710 and 750, then 850, whatever, et cetera, right? Do you think, though, multi-athletes, decathletes and heptathletes have it more because it's nearly impossible to PR in all 10 events when you compete, when you can do a decathlon? So I'm sure someone had, beginning decathletes, et cetera, but that's extremely hard. So typically you are, especially when you get to a good level, so you're experienced in a lot of the events, typically you'll have maybe that's still a big deal to have a PR in a decathlete, but that means you're hitting subpar of your PR, and it's always based on that point total. So you have something like always like, oh man, if I could have just gotten 100 more points here, 51 bar here, that's another 23. Do you think it's worse for multi-athletes?
Yeah, I mean, it just eats you up. And I think that you see some of the most successful multi-event athletes are the ones who have a good coaching background, where there's a great and healthy mindset, and you can hear them talking about it. It's something that changed from when I looked at things to at the beginning to the end, where like you're going in practice and you're like, oh, I did this, I cleared this, and then oh, I went to this meet and I ran on the 4x4 and I split this time. It was such a great time, oh my gosh, I ran amazing. And then you go to the 4 open on the first day of the deck, and you run 49.9 or a 50 point, and you're like, what? Where is that great time that I had, and so it's unhealthy, and that's something that I've tried to base my coaching on, is trying to have a healthy mindset, because it's very unhealthy to hold yourself to perfection, and to hold yourself to that. And it's great when it happens, but you're right, you're absolutely correct. I mean, some of my best point totals weren't PR laden, and actually some of the ones that I felt like ended up being bombs and I didn't even finish it, I started off with amazing PRs, and so you have to develop this mindset where you move on from one event to the next, and you move on. And yes, you look back and you say, I kind of wish I would have ran a little faster in those 60 hurdles for that hep. If I would have done that, then maybe there's always the what ifs, but you're able to let go. You're able to release that and say, okay, yeah, because for many people who aren't really aware of the decathlon, I mean, the worst thing to do is to be thinking about the previous event going to the next event, because then it affects you, and I think this goes back to where my coach, I said he could smack me, because I, especially younger me, is that I would be there in shot put, and it was a weak event to begin with, and if I scratch or I'm starting off with a bad throw, I'm just letting it linger and linger, and before you know it, I'm moping as we're going into the next event. And so then it screws up maybe what are your strong events. So it's having that great balance of what it takes to get through a couple of days.
It's amazing the compartmentalization that multis have to have. And really, honestly, and we don't talk about this in individual events, but individual event athletes too, long jumper, can't be thinking about the scratch on the first jump as they're going to their second attempt. They got to know what to correct and what to do better, but they can't be like, oh man, the first one's gone, that sucked. But it's like, man, you got another attempt right here. You better be focused on this one. Same with the shot put, like you mentioned there as well. Okay, I cut you off. You mentioned as you're going through your senior year because of some injuries and things like that, you're a little bitter about track and field. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it just stings. I think it's one of those things that, like, having that realization that, I mean, decathletes, I could have pushed through, but then you start getting into the idea where, even if you're getting a small sponsorship and you're doing these things, and even if your coach is working for free or whatever it may be, you're trying to hold down a full-time job. You're starting life, and am I going to continue to try and train and all these things? A lot of the struggles that you look at someone, we were talking about Rachel earlier, you have these track and field athletes, and the meaning of pro athlete is totally different in track and field. And I hope one day that changes, but you're going to have someone, just to specifically talk about her, is you have someone who is fighting for spots on the world team and setting these records, but at the same time is being a mother and having a career and trying to navigate the stresses of practicing and training, which is, it's maybe not as much as the decathlete because you're having to work so much, but it's so much, and you're exhausted. And so that realization that track and field was over for me, and maybe my idea of the success that I wanted to have didn't come to fruition the way I wanted to. It just had left a little bit of a sting on there, and it's a feeling that I feel like a lot of athletes probably still have. I would say probably even some of my athletes at the high school level, collegiate level, is where you're going through this and you're competing for this program, and then you graduate, and then it moves on, right? There's a new recruiting class, and there's new kids that are coming up, and the coaches aren't forgetting about you, but it's just the reality. It moves so fast, that it starts and then it's over. And whether it's injuries or maybe just other interests take into account, or you run out of time in that sense, it will end. And for me, that feeling, that bitterness didn't even subside. I moved back to New Mexico, and I had one of my previous coaches who I ended up coaching with my first years. He asked me if I wanted to start, you're back in town, do you want to come in and coach high school? And I was kind of like, no, I don't, at that moment, I was still trying to transition. And then I started seeing, moving back, like the state of what the program was, and it wasn't having a lot of success. And, and I think for me, it shook out of there, and I was able to distance myself enough from my competing days, but also to see that this was an avenue to experience something that is such a huge part of my life, and when I got back into coaching, we went, for me, I went head over heels, back into it, and that and I know that the award this year was for this last season, and having a great season, but in those years in Taos, where I started my coaching career, was able to build a program that hadn't won any state titles, and we won 8 state titles. So
holy cow,
5 boys and 3 girls, and sent kids to New Balance, and they were all Americans and state records, and all these great things. But people hear these, and I was talking with a new coach, actually a coach that reached out to me from New Mexico. She coaches a small school, and she was just trying to get not only from me but from other coaches some input, and it's her first year coach. It's daunting, even though it's a small school, there's a lot to it. And I think that people hear these stories and they start hearing like, oh, I want to be that coach, I want to have those titles. And maybe they see the programs that I've been fortunate to have, where they're just dominating, but they don't see that those first years when I started in Taos, I was in a gym in snowy New Mexico, northern New Mexico, with 4 kids or 3 kids or sometimes 2 kids, and we're lifting weights, and we're starting, indoor track. There's not really an indoor track at the time. They don't see the small beginnings, right? They don't see the birth of a coach, who's saying, I have the technical background. I feel I have this, started this, but just because you have all of this, you don't have the facilities, you don't have the equipment, and so it's awesome to look back and see, where the tide kind of turned in terms of me becoming a coach and beginning the journey of where I am now.
Well, first I have to give a shout out to that coach that called you. I mean, that takes guts, especially in your first year, to reach out to someone and, really you're laying your soul out like, hey, I know nothing here. I need help. How have you done it? So maybe I can implement some of those things in there. I really like that. Sometimes we don't reach out for help until we're desperate, like we're 5 years in and we're not having success or something like that. So I love that she did that. Bravo to her for doing that, and with others as well. That's amazing. I love hearing that, because that's the type of person that, heck, in 10 years she's going to win the New Mexico Coach of the Year or the National Coach of the Year. You know what I'm saying? Like that's awesome, man. I love hearing that. So tell me, I don't think we after 200 plus interviews, we've had a lot of amazing topics here, from recruiting. You touched on one earlier about selfishness of an athlete, meaning when you're an athlete, it's a selfish pursuit. You're taking in what the coach is telling you for you to get better, right? So we've talked about that with Cameron Babb from Washburn out in Kansas. So it's some amazing, really important topics. But a topic that has not come up that you broached on there was, you said, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, so correct me where appropriate, you had to separate yourself, Ernest the athlete, to Ernest more like the person, because you're still just not even really getting into coaching at that point. And then now it becomes Ernest the coach. That's interesting topic there, I think, to me, of our identity is wrapped up into us as an athlete. And like you said, it ends at some point for everybody, whether it's in 8th grade or 80 years old. Somewhere track and field eventually stops. For most of us, I've seen a 100-year-old person do a 100-meter dash, which still just boggles my mind. That's amazing. That person has not stopped track and field, but for the majority of us, it does end. And then you have to transition. You have to become not the athlete, not the person who gets claps on the back because you scored 7,000 in the decathlon or you vaulted 60, whatever. It becomes different. So how did you handle that transition from, everything coaches were pouring into you was so that you could go become a better decathlete, a better long jumper, shot putter, javelin thrower, to now you're in that gym, it's snowing outside, you got 2 kids that maybe can't walk and chew gum at the same time, and you've got to now take what you have learned and your ideas of coaching, of how to get better, and now it has to go out of you instead of into you to these athletes. How did you handle that transition before you became obviously these were steps that became part of the 8 state titles, which, oh my goodness, that's amazing. How did that transition occur for you? Were there people that you reached out to? How did you do that?
I think it wasn't I don't want to say that it was like a stark transition where it was like, oh, I'm too scarred with the memory of track, and all of a sudden, oh, it's amazing. I mean, during that time, it's you're starting to really think about what you really enjoyed about track and field, and that's what changed for me. And I think that when I said no to it, it wasn't that I was just strictly saying, I don't want to be around it. It hurts. It was, that life, there's a lot of things, health and transitioning back to New Mexico, all these things, and it wasn't the right time. But really what it is it's this building of, well, what were the most important things for me when I was competing? And, when I look at it, I think of even just from award winning. I say, okay, you win athlete of the year for the conference, or you win the conference title in this, you get invited to go to Texas Relays Decathlon, which is kind of a big deal. They don't allow people in there. But I say, well, what was my most fond memories? And it's like, actually, it's being on the airplane, going somewhere with your team. It's the conference titles. We won a couple of indoor conference titles, and the joy that everyone has and celebrating those types of things. And so you start saying, like, you start realizing that you're not so much in love with the accolades. I mean, at least I wasn't. you kind of love the sport. You enjoy the sport, you enjoy being around the sport, but you enjoy being around the sport with other people, and so I feel like that's where it blossomed to, where it was like, I have a lot of this knowledge, and I started to realize that I think I can be a better coach than I ever was an athlete, by far, by far. And so that feeling of, this is something that I want to give it a go, that really set in, and it was it's an awesome decision. It takes a lot to be a high school coach, and a college coach, obviously, and a professional coach, middle school coach, but if it's something that is in you, that is something that's very important to you, it's not as hard, because there's a passion there for the sport.
I love that you mentioned conference championships, because that's actually my favorite meets of the year. I'm so blessed I get to go to all these NCAA national championships, Olympic trials, Nike nationals. I mean, Penn relays, Drake relay, the biggest and the quote unquote best track meets in the world. But there's nothing like a conference champion, even in the new conferences that are coming up. There's nothing like, oh, these are the 10, 12, 16, I don't know how many they're going to put in some of these college conferences, but like, these are the people, like, I got to score. And because of the limited amount of teams, call it 10 to 16, eighth place is still very, very hard to get in an event, but it still gets you a point. And that could be the point that makes the team title. Nationals is a little different, because you're dealing with, everybody there. And so eighth place is still obviously very, very hard to get, but that eighth place could happen to someone who is not in the team title hunt. So it's just a little different. Still love it, just different. So I do love college and high school conference championships. Those are amazing.
It's a mental shift. It can't help but be away from you. And maybe people won't agree with this decision, but I remember one indoor championship, I had a lot to do. I was doing, obviously, lots of events indoors, and high jump was one of the early events. And we were fortunate enough, I think, a teammate and I, actually, three of our teammates, we went 1, 2, 3. We were the last 3 in, right? And one of our teammates, Timmy, I think he was out. And so my good friend CJ and I, we were the last 2 in, and I think we had cleared, maybe it was like 6:10. And CJ was just kind of a high jumper. And so, Coach Brown tells me, well, you're done. And I said, it's like, well, what do you mean I'm done? And he's like, no, you have more to do. Point wise, we're 1 and 2. And, I wasn't super upset about it. When I look back at it, I think I was like confused. I was like, oh man, I want to beat him. I want to, win, there's that competitive nature, but, it was starting to click for me that, okay, it doesn't matter, and I think, like I said, some coaches might not agree with that. An athlete deserves that. But for me, as a multi-event athlete, he's also thinking about me. It's not like he just says, oh, he wants CJ, to win, and that he wants me to be relegated to second place. He's saying, you still have to do X, Y, Z, and this might be all that CJ's doing this to me. So of course he's gonna jump till his legs fall off, and obviously he's like a more consistent high jumper. That's his thing. So it's just this mindset that it's like, it's not only about me, and I think that was something that I carried on later on. And I think some of my best meets were conference meets, because, I think that's where I thrived, where it was, one, I just loved it. It was better. I mean, I feel like it was exciting. Because even nationals, I think it's a little different there. I mean, you have the upper tier teams that are competing for a national title. But, if you're going down the road, the list, and you're saying, okay, there's probably 5 teams that have like a legit shot at winning. And the rest of the teams, it's kind of a less personal experience, or it's a more personal, but a less team environment, because, you may have a whole team at a conference meet, but, when you go to nationals, you have just a handful of athletes. Maybe you have 10 or 20 versus when you have 40, or maybe you only have 1 or 2, and so it's a different experience for those athletes that are going there. And I think it mirrors it now that I've become a coach, and, we have our state championship and our whole team's there, and we're excited. And then there's a little drop off, from the intensity standpoint, because you have a couple athletes that are going to go to to nationals or whatever, and now they're training in a smaller group. And so, I think that call back to the team, a team, and what track was important was really what kind of set me over to come back, and to be a coach.
Yeah. Isn't that why you see kids who will split something crazy on a relay, but can never get anywhere close to it on an individual, because it's like, oh, they're competing for someone else. Same with, I think that's a big reason why you see some kids who really excelled in college, who go pro, go to the next level and never get there. There's obviously a lot of factors that go into it, but they're also now not competing for someone else. They're only competing for them. If you're a 100-meter sprinter and you were on Oral Roberts' team, man, you needed to get points from that pole vaulter that was on your team, and you need to get points for that shot putter. And now when you go to the next level, it's like, it's only for me. It's just for me. And that's different. That's, competing for someone else is bigger than competing for yourself. That's why you see, I think that's why you really see, I know the Olympics and world champs are obviously a big deal because, people in stands, and it's what we all have worked for our entire lives as little 8-year-olds thinking about winning a gold medal. But I think there's more of the psychological factor of, we all have Team USA. I know it's not team score, but I care about that vaulter. I've never watched vault in my life since I've been out of college, but you know what? They're Team USA. I want them to win a medal because I'm going for a medal as well. So I think that's tremendously well said. So help us understand. You go back to New Mexico, you go to Taos, you start coaching. First, I alluded to this earlier. I'm always amazed at the history, what I've learned about the history of track and field inside of the state of New Mexico. You have the Henrys, of course, right? I mean, so Pat Henry, his brother Matt, the Henry family, they came from New Mexico. We probably, maybe today everybody thinks they came from Texas, or maybe if you remember Louisiana, LSU. No, they're New Mexico people. Mario Satania, now at Texas A&M, of course, with Pat Henry. See, I didn't even realize they put the New Mexico connection back together there. Satania, yeah, good friend of mine, the NFHS, one of the VPs and CEO of the NFHS network, Mark Koski, who's also a Gill podcast alum. He is from New Mexico. I can't ever talk about New Mexico without talking about my good friend Kurt Thomas, now the head coach at University of Alabama, Birmingham. He was my GA at Mississippi State. He's a very proud Hobbs New Mexican, so cannot not ever say things about him. Adam Kedge from Albuquerque Academy, we've had on the podcast. Spencer Sealshot from the Mexico High School Association, Track Coaches Association. I mean, really amazing people and athletes have come out of this, honestly, tiny state when you come to population here. It's unbelievable. And you were talking about Taos, you won 8 state titles. How did you build up to that? And you mentioned some really good athletes that you had as well through that build up.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look back at that and such a fond memories of some of the coaches that we coached with and athletes because it was also the beginning of my coaching career, and so I look back at some of the things that I was doing maybe from a technical standpoint at that time as well, and like, what were you thinking?
Okay, pause right there though, because I truly believe that if you don't say that as a coach, if you've been coaching for any amount of years, you're not coaching right. I mean, think about this. If you are like 10 years into coaching and you go, oh yeah, man, I was doing what I do now is what I did my year 1. I was doing it right. That's a red flag to me, right? But when a coach says, because the same thing, when I coached for, a little bit over 10 years, I'm all, whenever I see some of my athletes from my first couple of years of coaching high school, I was like, hey, I'm sorry. Like, oh boy, how good could you have been? I'm just so sorry what I did to you. I don't know what I was thinking. Whenever I hear a coach say that, it's an automatic, if there's red flags, I guess this is a green flag. It's an automatic like, oh, Ernest, okay, you're doing a great job. Because if you can say you should apologize for your year or two, that means you're growing. So bravo. That's the way you should be coaching, in my opinion. I love that.
Yeah. And so I came in that first year and you're a little bit removed from, I wouldn't say the community, it's somewhere I grew up, but you still know, I still knew some of kids, maybe their younger siblings or whatnot, but you're kind of coming in. And what I talked about earlier is my impact, or the impact that Coach Dial had on me, or some of the older Taos kids that were running when I was there. I think that there was some of that as well when I came back, and it's this feeling that, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, this guy. So it's a small team, and some of them, that's one of the battles we have in New Mexico is, track and field from a sports standpoint. I mean, there's not a lot of there's a lot of kids that do it and maybe do it well, but it's just something to do in the spring, it's a precursor to football, or it's something to do after basketball, or I don't play baseball, so I'll just go do track because I'm an athlete, right? And so they're not really into it. They don't know anybody that's a professional athlete. They don't know what's a good time or a bad time. They don't know what's, so it's this blank slate of, wow, okay. I think that the year prior to me getting there, it was just maybe one or two athletes that even went to state. And so, not to say that that's the way it always was, or that there wasn't success. There's always been great athletes in Taos, but that's just kind of where it was heading into me coming back. And it's just this thing that, well, we have to start somewhere, and when I look back at it, something that I think it was really successful was I just said, whoever's going to be here, we're going to get after it. That I don't care who's going to be here. And I know that's more talking about, preseason, because that was something that was not heard of in Taos at the time. It's like track started, our first meet, when you thought about it, was, the beginning of March, right? And that's late for many states. That's extremely late. But not only that, is everyone's still playing basketball. So those first few meets, basketball is going into March. And so, you have the situation where your best athletes, if you even have them coming out, they're not even out there. And so it's just not a really big priority. And so it's this feeling that if you think that you're going to start with this stable of amazing athletes and they're going to be refined, that's not the case for all you new coaches out there, that you're not going to have this awesome, 6'6" high jumper that steps out and, scissor kicks 6 feet for you on, his first day. And so I feel for us is that there was a great buy-in from just a handful of athletes, our coaching staff that we talked about, even, Coach Mitchell, Benny Mitchell, he was the one who invited me. He was a coach of mine, when I was in high school. He coached football and he coached track. And he was someone who I even look back, and for him just to come out and say, can you come out? Can you come coach? Looking at those things and just the trust of saying, all right, well, you know what you're doing. So let's move with this. And you just starting with, we didn't even have pole vault pits. We didn't have pole vault mats, or poles. We didn't have a lot of things that you needed to, okay, so we just start with that stuff. And we have athletic director Nikki McCarty at the time, who was just extremely supportive in a sense. It was like, we don't have that and it's really expensive, but let's see what we can do. It's not great. Like I said, times were a little different then, but I wanted to start with pole vault. I wanted to start introducing that into our repertoire as a team, and it's an exciting event. And so I would take kids down to another school, and we would go practice on theirs. We would borrow their poles. I was stealing poles from other people and saying, can we bring those back to you a week or two later? You're trying to do these. We don't have this equipment, so we're using some of this as and instead, and we're just trying to make do. But if you carry that weight, some coaches, it's hard, and maybe you've done that for a long time, but if you carry that weight and you really drive that, you're going to have buy-in, hopefully from kids, if you're doing them the right way, and so little by little, it started to grow, it started to kind of fester into this program that was like, okay, we're showing up to meets and we're fielding a full team. And now we're showing up to meets and we're competing. And now all of a sudden you're going to the state meet. And, I'll never forget, we went it was my second year and we went to state. And that was the first team trophy. We got third on the boys side. But the year prior to that, that first year we had some really good athletes. And I look back at it now and I say, man, I wish I would have had those kids for, 4 years, because there was some athletes there that were really talented, and they ran for you. They did everything you could ask for. And if we would have just had some more time technically, that would have been great. And it just starts to build, the more you're invested and the more the kids trust you and they buy in, then you get more kids that are wanting to come out and be part of that. And it just kind of snowballs, but it's not a passive thing. I know I'm kind of rambling, but it's not, you have to be extremely active with your presence in getting kids in. You have to be caring about what's going on in their lives. You have to really make sure that you're having some patience with kids who don't know about track and field, who maybe think that, oh, I went on Monday and I'm not going to show up. You can't just say, especially in a small town, oh, okay, these are if you miss one day of practice, you're off the team. You have these rules because you're starting to build this foundation from scratch, and that's very challenging, a daunting task for sure.
I like to bust myths, and one of the myths that I quite enjoy busting is high school coaches can't coach on the college level. And typically that's for one major excuse that I hear, and that's you can't recruit. You never recruited before. And that's such a big part of college coaching, et cetera, which if you go back and look at our library here of past guests, a lot of them started as high school coaches, by the way. So let's just stop with this myth. I'm wondering, because you mentioned, being in the gym with 2 kids and you built into a state champion, multiple time state championship team there, Taos, how much of it was because success, people want to be connected with success, right? So as you started winning, like that second year when you got a team trophy, I imagine you maybe had more kids coming out the very next year. It's like, oh, wait a minute, they want to see, maybe I should be on that team, right? Maybe I can be a state trophy winner or something like that, right? And so you get kids that want to join a successful program because success breeds success. So that's one part of recruitment. But then every high school coach I've had here on the podcast, we've had many, has talked about, oh yeah, if you want a successful program, which means you need numbers, you better be recruiting. You better be in that hallway saying, hey, Johnny, saw you at the football game. You did a great job. You ever thought about throwing the shot put for us, or whatever? How much of your team success and team size came from kids just joining because you started getting better as a team, and how much of it was the activity part of you actually in your staff recruiting the hallways?
Yeah, and that's something I want to bring up real quickly, and it's really challenging because for me, not being at the time in the classroom or in the school.
Okay, I was going to ask that. That's a great point. So you're an outside coach at this point still.
So there's a huge thing there, but that can't. You have to go to the basketball games and you have to go to football games. And to be fair, I have relationships with the football coach at the time and the community as a whole. So there's a lot of impact there. But I think it's a blend of everything what you had just said. It's these kids, it's not like, oh, there was this magic formula from this golden coach that just came and shined this light and they were successful. You have a lot of great kids who buy in, and they're extremely invested in what they see the effort that you put in. They know you're not getting paid very much or at all, and they know that you're there for them. And so there's this feeling that this is exciting. And then when they have a little bit of success, they start realizing, wow, if I listen and I do this is going to work out. And then, like as you said, there's a mixture of the success, but then also the failure. We have some kids who, after that year, I think our boys came back, and our boys, they had gotten third, and we were thinking, we're ready. This team, we can have success. Well, actually, next year, we have a situation where our girls win, and our boys didn't. I think it might take like that. Girls win, and our boys get third. And on the ride home, it's something, as a coach, it's euphoric. You're just like, I can't believe that we won a state title. It's like, it's just this feeling like, you believe in your team, having a track mind, you see the writing on the wall early, you start seeing how it's coming together, you see how kids are developing, and you're saying, we have a good shot. Maybe no one else believed in us, because we were, we even had some coaches call us a doormat. We were at a coaches meeting. I don't think they made it in a bad way, but they had said, oh, no, you guys are looking good. You guys have always been the doormat. It's this feeling that, wow, like you're coming up. But our boys on that ride home, they were extremely upset that the girls had won. And don't get me wrong, they were very happy for them. But we came home and we did like a lap around the track, like when we got home from the state meet, and we were excited for the boys because they got third too, but they were in the back and they were just kind of mopey. And we had a lot of underclassmen there, and that started the fire of 5 in a row. The boys, they didn't lose for 5 years in a row. And so it was kind of this play on it that it's a mixture of success and trust and all these good things, but if you start turning the right screws and you start really building a team and developing like healthy fire in these kids, like they want to be successful, you know, and they really thrive on that success, right?
See, this is why I'm so glad God put me in the lane of track coaches and not football or baseball or softball or volleyball, because listen to that uniqueness. And it is unique to track coaches. I know there's some other sports, maybe golf and tennis, maybe on some high school levels. But the track coach, I mean, I'm seeing this picture that you're painting. You get on the bus to go back home. Your girls' team just won. There is no better elation. Everybody is pumped. They're high, and your guys didn't win. I know they got third, but they had expectations maybe of winning, but they didn't win. And you've got to navigate that. You've got to navigate the emotions of 14 to 18-year-old kids. I'm thinking the same thing of a Dennis Shaver at LSU. The girls win the SEC title and the guys don't. He's got to navigate that. That's two teams that he has to pick up on one and celebrate with the other on the same bus. By the way, football team loses. Okay, they just have to worry about their own kids. There's no comparison in that sake, because Johnny in the next seat, you ain't got to compare because he actually won, right? Baseball, they don't have to do that. That's so unique. It's I'm just seeing that picture of, it's dark, the meet's over, a long ride home, and it's like, oh crap, I'm super happy, and then I'm super bummed for my other team. And again, like you said, you go back to the track to do the victory lap, and they should be happy. They got third. That's not chump change here, and they're down in the dumps. They didn't win, and you as the coach have to navigate that, man. That's there is no coaching education. There is no book. There is no lesson here to help you be prepared for that, man. That's quite amazing. Well, what's it like? I never won a state title. What's it like the first one so the girls were the very first one ever that you're on the staff for? What's that like? I mean, there ain't that. I saw someone poo-pooing the other day about if an athlete didn't win a sprint event in California, Texas, or Florida, if you didn't win the state title in one of those three states, you probably weren't very good anyway. So who cares? I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. To be a state champion in an individual event, there's one a year. I mean, that's amazing, right? A state championship team, there's one a year in your division. I know there's multiple divisions, all that kind of, but in your division, the only ones that we can compare ourselves to, because that's who we compete against, there's only one a year that wins the state title, and you did it in your very first one. How did that feel as a coach? From all, you think about all your experiences as an athlete and a high school athlete and college athlete and winning conference titles as a college athlete, but you win the whole enchilada. You are the big dog for that year.
Yeah, it is. It's better than when I was an athlete. I think it's
Hold on, I want to make sure I heard that. You said it's better when you were an athlete, or better than when you were an athlete?
Oh, I feel like coaching and being part of that, like, it's not to diminish the experience of all that other stuff, but and hopefully there's not that recency bias, but it's better, and it's just because it's even less about you, in my opinion. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're saying, well, you're the coach or guy, but it's just less about you. I mean, the people who competed are the ones that were there, and yes, they bought in as to your philosophy or to what your staff is doing and to all these different things, but it's them, and you're getting to see them achieve, and you're getting to see them fight through some of those demons. And honestly, in those first championships, we asked one of our girls who was new to the sport to do something that we shouldn't have. It was like one of those situations where you get those mid-distance to distance runners who's a new distance runner, never really been to that on that level. She comes out, and her name's Martinez, but the schedule is like medley or mile. And in Mexico, we have our medley is a 2:2:4:8. So she's the 800-meter runner. She's also a mile, and it's like, well, she's hopefully trying to get points in the mile, but without her, our medley will have no points. And so it's like, I've learned, for me, I know what I want to do with things, but I always talk to the athletes and make them feel like they have the input in what we're going on. So I go to her and say, this is the situation. Kind of have to, be really hard to do both. This is where we're at, whatever we choose to do. Right now it's looking like the point wise might be similar. And, what are your thoughts? And she just flat out says, we need it. I'll do both. And though this is like we're talking an all-out 8, and then having to come back. Or I'm getting a little confused. I don't remember if it was which one was it first. It was the 8, or I think it was the medley first, and then the mile, but it could be backwards. But she had to run, and then it was like 20 minutes later come back and come back in that event. And we're not talking about 100. We're not talking about long jumping and running a relay at the same time. These are crazy events. And so, long story short, she comes out and she tucks in behind the favorites, and we get a second in the medley. She comes in, she gets in there as well in the next race, and she's right in there as well for the mile. And so that kind of sacrifice, and fittingly, she was on the front page. It was, of the newspaper that she was there and representing the team. But it's kind of those things that it's like, this is an athlete who had never been to state, and never been on that stage, and to come through, and it was just like, I'm going to do both, and when you're talking about that, she's not trying to win both necessarily, for glory. It's just that, she's doing it for the greater good of the team. And so I say that story because it just exemplifies like the feeling of what it means to win that state title. And you're just kind of emotional in a sense, because you're seeing that, there's a selflessness, and then this kind of coming from behind, in terms of that underdog. So it's a very, very special. And there was a similar story on our boys' side when our boys won their first title. There was some teams at the time that were really strong. I mean, our class at the time was bigger than kind of, I would say, what it is now, but really good teams, and some teams that had been powerhouses and kind of been the figureheads of, sprinting and been at the top there. They had won a few titles as Silver City as a high school, but we had the same thing where one of our situations is where we had our 4x2, and this is a decision of mine to put our fastest runner on the second leg so we could stay out of the mess in that 4x2 and give us a shot to kind of be in the mix. And then we put someone whose name was Jonathan at the end. And the way it unfolded, I was hoping we would be a little bit further ahead going into the anchor leg to give ourselves a shot. And they ended up having their anchor, who was a really fast athlete, all-state athlete. He got the baton, and we handed off to Jonathan, who was not, I don't even think he made the state final. He wasn't that kid, but, he was a smaller in stature guy. And I'm standing kind of at the finish line, and I'm looking, and I see this big kid come around from their team. And it's just kind of like, okay, we're in the mix, we're there. You could kind of see we were there, but then all of a sudden you see our kid kind of pop out, and we're like, I mean, he's right there. And then you see our kid pull even, and they're coming down. And honestly, Jonathan ended up becoming a great athlete for us later on, and he always was, but, I don't know if he really had any business going toe to toe with that guy. And it came down to the end, and Jonathan just sold out and dove kind of at the line, and they won the state title in that relay. But that was those kids, you can have a program and whatnot, but you have kids like that, and there's so many of them that could tuck your ear off of those kids, but that just rise to the occasion. And they just they set a standard that well, I guess you set a standard as a coach, and when they rise to it, it's like that is more powerful to me than a coach setting a standard, because when other kids see their peers do that, it's very powerful. I think it's the parent thing, right? You can have a parent telling someone over and over and over, but if they have a mentor who's not their parent and they say it one time, they're like, oh wow, they're amazing. You're like, dad is like, I've been saying that for
I see you've been listening in on my parent conversations lately. Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah. I love that. The coach sets the standards. The athletes have to become the standard. Yeah, that's perfect. Hey, I do want to spend some time for time's sakes here. So so you ended up winning 8 state titles at Taos?
Yes.
That's amazing. So how did we get to Los Alamos? Kind of give us the 30,000 foot level. Why leave? How do we get to Los Alamos? And then how did we build up to this past season here in 2023?
So, over those years, having a ton of great athletes, and as a coach, you pour your heart into a program, especially one that you build, with a staff and a community and parents and everyone that comes into that equation. And it's hard to leave. Like, even if life calls you in different directions, you don't want to leave because you're invested. But for me, those last years that I was in Taos, I ended up moving a little bit south. And so I was working kind of out in Santa Fe, and I was commuting every day to Taos. And this is an hour and 15, one way. So it's like, you're working, and then you're having to leave early and fly out up to Taos, and you're coaching, and that just became it was hard to maintain in those last years. But then it went to the point where it was almost to the point where I was saying, well, I think I'm just gonna stop coaching, just because for me, everything that was the way it was unfolding with other things that were taking place as well, it was just hard for me to continue there in Taos. And so it came to a headway where I had a last group of kids, and obviously we had more that were coaching and athletes that I hated to leave, but there was these athletes that I had since they were young. After our foray into in the summer, when they were already finished with high school, but they were competing in the summer, they went to nationals, and after that it was kind of the natural leading point for me. And kind of heard about Roundabout Way. There was interest in me to go to Los Alamos, and that brings us to Los Alamos, where coming from Taos, we were the small program that had to build from scratch, and Los Alamos has always been a school with a lot of pedigree in running, in cross country, and they have great track records. There's been some amazing athletes and coaches that have coached in Los Alamos. And so for me, I was ready to kind of hang up coaching for the time being. But the way it worked out is, for me, leaving Taos, and immediately there was an opportunity to coach there, but it was closer, and so it cut my commute, less than half. And so that's a huge deal. And so it was I think it was time. It was a lot of regret to leave that program in Taos, but it was great, the time that was shared there, for sure.
So how did you say you came into a different situation at Los Alamos? You didn't come from there. There wasn't going to be two athletes only in the gym. You had a kind of a pedigree there. How was it different building up to this year's state title?
Well, I've been in Los Alamos for 4 years now, and so we've won 3 state titles in Los Alamos on the girls' side now. Our first year, I don't want to speak for that, but it was COVID year that was canceled, and I honestly believe that we would have been very successul that year as well. But it was different. I mean, it was kind of in the mix. There was some great athletes that have been at Los Alamos. In fact, Chase Ely, who just has won back-to-back world shot put titles for the women. She's a Los Alamos graduate. So she was, Los Alamos has had some athletes, but really, when you look at the records and how much success has Los Alamos had, in terms of times and athletes, there was just a handful of state titles over its history. And actually, they had been on a drought for about 10 years, and so it was kind of this limbo period where there's great athletes. It's not like you said, you're an athlete, you're having 2 kids in the gym. There's a lot more participation and interest in track and field. So as a coach, it's kind of interesting that many things are the same, but they just you work around them differently. And what I mean by that is you still have to motivate, and you're still trying to build your program and have them buy into what is necessary to win. But maybe you don't have to the numbers of just getting initially the kids out there isn't as hard,
because you have something to sell off the bat, not just a dream. You have like, hey, we've had some state titles. Hey, we've had Chase Ely. We've had things like that. You could be part of this as well.
Yeah, I just think also in the community, just in terms of participation in sports and activities, is a lot higher. It's easy to say that it's a more affluent community in a sense, and so it's kind of there's just a lot of interest in participating in sports in general. And so whereas we built it up to Taos, where you have this X amount of kids, in Los Alamos, even from a middle school level, there's a lot of kids who are interested in running, and there's been some amazing coaches in Los Alamos. That's not by, and that's one thing that I think I know for time's sake, but it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way when people say, "Oh, well, you just have the numbers," oh, you just have this. I've been on both sides of that spectrum. What people don't really always want to take into account is that sometimes those numbers are due to a lot of commitment and hard work to get them out. And in this case for Los Alamos, it's not that, okay, these kids, everyone just loves track and field. Well, there's a history of that. And somewhere down the line, Rob and Kathy Hipwood for cross country, they've had so many titles. I mean, they've won like 20 some state titles. I mean, it's crazy. But on the track, Larry Baca and Paul Anderson and these coaches that have coached at Los Alamos, there's a reason why there's interest and there's this excellence that is there in getting these kids out there. And so just the program as a whole, just as a starting point, had a lot more, in line. So it was a different situation in many ways.
Yeah, numbers help for sure. Let's not discount that especially in any sport. I mean, if you have 100 football kids out, you're liable to have 22 better ones than if you have 30 kids out. So for sure. But to your point, that didn't just happen. I could easily take a team that has 100 kids and make it 20. I can get rid of 80 kids real quick with my style, right? So you said it right. You having those numbers, well, that was built on hard work. That didn't just happen. So yeah, we might be good because of the numbers, but I had to get those numbers. Oh, and by the way, I still had to coach all those numbers as well. They don't just come out and magically end up winning state titles here.
That's a great point. It's one of those things that people don't realize. When you're a coach, and especially at Taos, we had some great assistants and coaches that were working in Taos. But it was a smaller crew. And so when you're in the beginning, you may have a few athletes and it's great because you have, you're starting to grow, but you're not that big. Well, once the numbers get big, there's a lot that goes into that. You're having to manage that much. And all of a sudden now, if you want to go long jump, it's like, oh, now we have 5 long jumpers that have qualified for state, but you have 15 boy long jumpers. Well, pit time, and eyes on. And so things change. And then in Los Alamos, that's the way it goes. We get these kids out, and it's still a process of going out and talking to coaches and getting support from other sports coaches to have kids, promote them to come out for track. But you have these numbers, and, kind of fast forwarding in that sense is when you build success, then there's a lot of other issues. I wouldn't say problems, but issues that come with that. And that comes into relay spots. It's uber competitive. It's individualizing those programs for that. I mean, for us, the last 2 years, like just example for the girls 100, we had 8 or 9 girls in the 100 at state. We had 5 girls in the state final in the 200 this last year alone. And so we're talking about having a girl who's in the state final, all state athlete, who's maybe not on your 4x2. What does that do for parents? What does that do for that? You're really having to navigate a whole lot of things when it comes into that. You have to have a program and a trust that's built in order to withstand those kind of rigors and those kind of stresses. And some people say those are great problems to have. They are, but they're
still problems.
they're challenges, and that didn't come just because we have numbers. Like I said, right. The year before we got there was at the state final, there was no girls in the 1 and the 2 finals, and so you're going from building that from a base, and really the success at the top end of I feel like track and field. A lot of coaches do many things right, but it's the coaches who are turning those little screws at the end that you're able to have that really good, whether it's technically mental preparation and kind of building that confidence, whether it's putting things together right, whatever it may be. But the coaches that are the most successful, in my opinion, are the ones that are able to turn those screws and get the most out of their kids and to put them in the best positions to succeed. Or maybe the foresight and saying, I see that 8th grader coming up and she's their fastest kid. Well, we already have a couple of fast kids. Maybe we can turn her into a hurdler. Maybe we're pushing these kids into these different areas. And so you have a well-balanced team. Last year, I think the evidence of that, of the staff and the program, was we won every event on the track, at state. So last year, and
every event.
every single running event, from sprints to distance to relays, every run, and then a few field events as well. So like, it's not just, oh, you have a sprint program, or, oh, your distance kids are good. It's a hard work of our staff to try and build from early preseason to have this well-rounded team, because that's what's going to make things, you have a successful team, is when you're able to, have a little bit everywhere, and really lean on different strengths and weaknesses, but you have to be active in what you're thinking about there.
Is this the best team you've had?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think the girls, these last couple of years, I think last year, maybe the year before, it's grown. I mean, like, going into the season, I'm saying, this could be the best team that Los Alamos has ever had, and then you say it again the next year. But it's the truth. We're bringing back a lot of girls next year, some talented athletes. Athletes who, like, even in the long jump, we have the last. Well, I guess the one graduated this year, but in the last 3 years, the long jump alone, we've had 3 state champion every year, but they've been different girls. And we had one girl who didn't even long jump this year, and she would have been in the mix. So, like, there's a lot coming back, but you're always looking at that. But when I look at best teams that I've ever coached, it's hard to compare, right?
Yeah,
apples and oranges. But in Taos, we had some dominant years, a couple of years that there was a wide margin, but I think where I've really wanted to go in my later years in Taos and also in Los Alamos is that we're in the second biggest class, and so there's a class that's bigger. I don't really get caught up in being like the best team in New Mexico or the best team in 4A. I talk about being the premier, but the team in New Mexico, but that's more of just being, from a professionalism and from trying to build a program that doesn't necessarily mean X and O's is the best, but to try and be the most successful that we can be. But it's kind of superseded that to where I want these athletes to think about what's next, or what's higher than that. Like, okay, 4A is fine, but what about 5A? And I think that's over the last couple of years where we've tried to schedule and been fortunate enough to schedule our track meets where we're competing against all classes. And last year we went to Chandler, and we went and won a meet in Texas and El Paso. And so just trying to go to different places, because the truth is there is a complacency that takes place with your athletes once they start having success. And it's not to diminish New Mexico, but we say, okay, that was great. You won districts or state. But if you want to go to college and you want to compete, well, guess what? There's a lot of beasts up north. There's great athletes in New Mexico, absolutely. But there's also great athletes in Colorado and Arizona, Texas. And, when we go to North Carolina and California and Oregon, so you have all these athletes that are there, and you start wanting them to start thinking outside the box, not only because it gives them opportunities for college, but it also helps them to not be complacent.
Yeah, it's a great point. Winning is hard. I think, especially in track and field, we forget that sometimes because we have, on the college level, 20 something events. So there's always a win, but a football game, there's only one winner. So we don't really have that in track necessarily until you get to like a conference title and stuff like that. So sometimes we forget winning is super, super hard. Winning twice is harder. Winning 3 times is harder, not only because you have a different mix of athletes, but to your point there of like, after 3 or 4 times, remember you're dealing with on your level here, 14, 18-year-old kids, even on the college level, 18 to 22-year-old kids, they're still kids. Winning 3, 4, 5 times in a row, I could easily see, I put myself in my 17-year-old self. I'm like, oh, well, then we're going to win next year. I mean, it's what we've done for the past 2, 3, 4 years. Why wouldn't we? Look, we got Johnny back. We're good. And it's like, oh, yeah, no. First of all, everything changes. Other people have different teams going on, and maybe there's a new coach or whatever. You've got to still be at your premier, your excellence to what you're doing out there to win, especially in track and field where it's the, mano a mano. It's only you. There is no handing off to a running back. You're either going to win the 100 or you're not, or you're going to win the long jump or not. And that's going to be 10 points or not. And, you've got to pull the whole team together for that. What, somewhere out there right now, they're listening is a coach of a program, not necessarily back to your Taos days where you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 kids and you've got to build the program, but maybe they're in the middle. They're getting kids to state, they're doing fine. You know, that's a big deal. That's a good, maybe they've had a state champion, and maybe they're winning a conference, maybe, but they're trying to get to that next level. I like how you said it, to the next level of whether it's winning conference more consistently or it's getting more kids to state and becoming a trophy team, top 3. What advice would you give for that high school coach that's listening now on getting over, I don't want to call it the hump, because that's very successful where I'm kind of putting this coach at, but to take it to the next level to win a state title?
Well, I think it's about learning two things is that you as a coach need to continue to grow. That's the first thing. And I think that's, for me, that's a huge thing that I'm always studying and trying to learn from my mistakes, or to learn from people's mistakes and other people's strengths and their successes, or my successes as a coach, or more importantly, our coaching staff. But you as a coach have to continue, like, back to what we're saying about carrying weight. I use that all the time, and I don't know if it's the proper way to say it, but that's the way I think about it. Because if you as a coach aren't prepared to carry weight, and I don't mean like, you're stressing and all this stuff, but I mean, excitement. And if you're not wanting to go and educate yourself to best practices in the long jump or the high jump, if you're relegating yourself to saying, I want to have a great relay, but you're not putting the effort into making that, setting those kids up for success, meaning you need to know the ins and outs. You need to be extremely knowledgeable about your craft. And that's a hard thing to say, because we're talking about coaches, even at the collegiate level, who maybe don't get paid a ton of money, or high school coaches who are doing things on the side, and they already give so much of themselves. And you're saying you need to give a little, not necessarily more, but you have to be able to really invest in that. And that's a hard thing to say, because some coaches truly are invested and maybe the results aren't there. But first, I would say, is making sure that you are understanding your craft, you're knowledgeable, and you're motivated, and you're passionate, and you're organized in terms of how you're delivering this information. One of the things, before I move on to the second thing I was going to say, was, as a coach, it's not even, I was, talking about like regurgitating information. And I think that's where some coaches, we get caught up, even myself, where, I go to Mike's podcast and I learn about a certain topic, right? Or I go to a clinic and I learn all this information, and then I go home and I just start like little Johnny, as you said, and we're like, you need to do this, and you just give him all this information. You have to understand and learn kids and how they learn, and how they process that information and where they're at. Are you trying to tell them a situation for Grant Holloway? You're looking at a Grant Holloway workout when your athlete is having a hard time, not 5-stepping hurdles, they're still stuttering before everyone, and so you have to understand that and be really aware of who you are and where your program is. But you have to push that envelope in terms of your knowledge base. You need to kind of hopefully try and hold and get your assistants and hold them knowledgeable. Sometimes your assistants aren't, ex-athletes. Sometimes they're moms, they're parents, and they do an amazing job, and learning how to guide them, and learning how to educate them, and learning how to play off of their strengths, so that they can, in fact, putting them in the right position so they can feed into your kids. And then that's from a coaching standpoint, but from a student's perspective, or an athlete's perspective, is you're trying to develop a mindset that it's not only about winning and losing. And that sounds kind of ironic coming from a program that's being very successful, but it's something that going into this next season, it's something that I have to really struggle with, because how do you motivate an athlete who's a 3-time state champion in their event? How do you motivate an athlete who maybe kind of feel like they're plateauing out? They've kind of stagnated, and they've already won everything kind of in New Mexico, and they know they're going to come back and they're going to have a successful season, even if they don't really work as hard. How do you get them not only to just be good, but how do you get them to grow? And I feel it's the same way you do the same thing as an athlete who's just starting. And it's learning, teaching them to try and approach things always as we're working to get better. We're trying to get better. As soon as we stop trying to get better, like, I don't really care what better is for you. For you, better might be being able to make the varsity squat, go to a meet. For you, it might be obtaining a PR this season. Maybe the last 2 seasons you're running a mile or 2 mile, and you've kind of haven't really committed. Well, this year, let's really focus on your fitness. Are you eating like pounds of candy? Let's just, we're not going to get too much into that. We don't have a dietitian on staff, but we're just trying to get them to see, like, what are the little things that you can do, studying and sleeping more and hydrating more, and just kind of buying in at practice, doing these types of things. And as a coach that would be talking to a newer coach that's just getting started, is don't sweat the small beginnings. Like, don't, whether that is the 2 or 3 kids, or like you said, where maybe a program that is trying to get over the hump. I know that a lot of people, when we talk about team building, they kind of dismiss it. Even at clinics, you'll say, oh, culture and these things. And maybe some coaches will, okay, we got 4th. I want to get 3rd. How do I get 3rd? Stop all this pseudoscience. How do we get 3rd? What do we do? What's this training regimen? And I don't want it to sound like a cop-out, but the truth is you really have to look inwards first and find your weaknesses as a coach and an athlete first. Like, if you're a project manager and you're looking at these things, you're looking at what is the glaring weaknesses. What are the things that we need to do, in order to not repeat the same mistakes? And so, some coaches will say, well, I keep a diary. I have all my workouts. Well, first of all, if you're a coach and you don't have everything written out your whole season and it's periodized, like, that's something that you should start. That way you have direction and you have guidance. But more so, it's where you're falling. Where there's things that are falling through the cracks. And so, like, for you, Mike, you're coaching and you say, man, every year at state we just show up and we're flat. Well, if you start looking at it and you say, oh, well, you know what? That workout that I've been doing, there's that. Or you just being able to look at that. But if you're not really looking at what you're doing and you just say, Johnny didn't care. Johnny was more excited about his girlfriend at the time. Or Betty, Betty she's not a big meat athlete. And you start doing these things. These could be true. These things could be, there's all these things of focus and whatnot. But if you're not putting your athletes to the best of your ability in good positions, in those positions to succeed, and looking inwards first, then you're doing everybody a disservice. If I'm sending kids over to my high jump coach and they're not doing well, oh, we won every event on the track, but high jump, we didn't even have you shot put. If we're not, as a head coach of your program, are you setting forth boundaries, and is your preseason looking, are the kids equipped to go and participate in these events? Are they physically fit to go and participate in these? Are you sending some of your best athletes over there? Are you hoarding? If you're the sprint coach and you're the head coach, but you're a sprint coach, are you taking all the best athletes, and then your mid-distance coach gets everyone who's can't really run distance and is not too fast? I would just say roundaboutly, it's just that as a coach, you have to really try and look at yourself and really take inventory of everything that you're doing and constantly revisit it. And sometimes it's going to reaffirm what you're doing, and sometimes you're going to say, maybe we should try something different. Maybe there's something that I need to do a little different.
Lots of great nuggets there. The ones that stood out to me when I go to clinics, and there invariably is 9 talks on, what we did with our state championship long jumper last year. How do we run our sprint program? How we run our distance program? And then invariably there's 1 or 2 that talks about, well, here's how we built the culture of Los Alamos track, or what, insert school name there. There's a lot more people in those other 9 than there are in that 1. Not many people are going, not as many coaches are going to the culture talk or the team management talks than they are the individual how to coach long jumpers. I thought that was really good that you pointed out there. Okay, Ernest, I'm going to ask a question. I know you don't want to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So you win the state title, you win every stinking running event at the state meet. That's crazy. That's ludicrous, by the way. That's like video game stuff, man. That's just nuts. You get either a call or a letter from USTFCCCA telling you that you're the national coach of the year. Tell us about that. Did you think it was a prank call? Like, yeah, right. Joe, is this you, my buddy, whatever? What did that feel like when you were notified?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that when I first found out after track, sometimes it's, especially this year, there was a lot going on in my personal life. And so there was so much commotion. And after following through summer track, it was kind of like, we need to have that healthy break. There was a lot of things that need to get taken care of. And so when I ended up finding out about it, I don't know. I think initially, I think I found out and I felt like it was like the state coach of the year. And so it was kind of like, that's great, but back to what I said before is I have a lot of amazing athletes and coaches and parents and administrators, like people that we've worked together over the years. And so these coach of the year awards, I mean, you don't have the success without this team. And you don't have the success without these amazing, in this case, these amazing girls who have dedicated so much time and effort into doing that. And so when I first hear that, I think it's great, but I just feel like it's more for, just the program as a whole. It's a sign that we're in a healthy position. And I can't say that it was like, woo, I feel that, not to diminish the award. And then I started realizing the boys coach Stephen Montoya, who's great. And that's something that would be cool to talk about at some point. But it's, Coach Montoya and I, we actually have some differences in training philosophies, but in many different ways, like in how we go about things. He's just an awesome coach as well on the boys side, and they've won 3 in a row. So there's just something good going on. The boys had
Yeah.
well, but he's the one who also sent me the kind of the link, and he's always very gracious in kind of publishing those types of things. And so finding out that I just feel like I like to shy away from not really having my face there, and in a sense, obviously sometimes doing these podcasts or in stuff that's in the newspaper, because I'd rather the focus be somewhere else, I guess. Yeah.
Steve Montoya and I are good Twitter buddies. So, oh yeah, I know him really well. That's one of my guys there. I love him. Hey, I told you didn't want to answer that question. That's why I was like, I'm going to ask it anyway, but I know you don't want to answer it. So
Right.
I'm going to let you answer it in a much better way, a much more fitting to you, Ernest Martinez way. So we almost called this podcast, instead of the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, we almost called it the Gill Athletics Shout Out podcast. So let us know give us some shout outs of your staff, people that were instrumental, whether it's boosters, president, principal. Tell us who, because you're right. I much prefer, like, especially on the college conference side, when they give out a coaching staff of the year award versus a coach of the year, because you're not coaching every single event. I'm sorry. I don't care how great you are. Even you, Mr. Decathlete, you were not coaching every event. It takes the entire staff. And especially in high school, it takes principals and teachers and boosters, parents, this whole amalgamation to make this state title. So give us some shout outs on, and I know you're going to miss people. You can go ahead and do the apology. I know if I forget you, it's not because, I'm putting him on the spot here. Do not, he is not, him better than I do. He ain't shading anybody because he forgets it. I'm putting him on the spot here. Give us some shout outs from this amazing year, Coach.
Yeah. I mean, this last year and kind of been there, Coach Stephen and Montoya and his wife, Lindsay, are distance coaches. And so, them taking that distance program with the help of Blake Wood, his wife, Rebecca, who kind of does those little behind the scene things with stats. Awesome. Love them. Blake also takes wonderful pictures for our team. Just awesome there with that. We have assistant coach who helps me out with two of them that help me out with sprints and hurdles is Amber Coffey, Marianne Novak, Coach Cotter. He's our horizontal, obviously some of our horizontal jumps, Charles Cotter, and Coach Christy Kelly. She works PT. So, I mean, come on. Like, we have someone who works in the hospital, works with that. She works high jump with our athletes. I mean, that's an invaluable resource. You have someone on staff that can really just kick butt in that sense. From the throws perspective, we have Coach Robbie Harris, who kind of helps out with our javelin. And then Coach Scott, who actually Bob Scott, who is a long time throws coach at Los Alamos, kept him on staff. He actually retired this year. This is last season, so we're going to miss him. But a man that coached with him, Pat Rousseau, he's going to be kind of taking over and doing that. But I mean, there's so many other coaches in there, that help out our middle school coaches and also we have people like our booster club, this year, Pam Lee and Lisa Rolfe and her Pam's husband Richard and Amber Coffey, we mentioned as a coach, she's on booster, and Amy Yost, who is additionally on our booster. But like, as you can tell in Los Alamos, there's just a lot of people that are just, around that program that are so helpful in terms of spreading out that workload. Our administration, just getting the things that we want and the things that we need. Sometimes we don't want them, but the things that we need. I can't speak enough about some of those people. Even there's a man that's on the boys team, so he doesn't really even coach on the girls side, but his name's Daniel Dunning. He's an awesome guy. And I think, not to regress, but like, it's the people that you can spit track with and that you can bounce ideas with. And I had those people in Taos as well, Nando and Coach Mitchell and Hilario and those guys, all those awesome people that we coached up, Ram, Padilla, and Coach T. But these coaches that when you're riding the bus home and you're just, it's just that feeling that you're talking about track and field, you're excited about track and field, and that really breeds success. So without them, I really want to shout out, family, loved ones, girlfriend, that just completely support you, as a track coach like this, especially, when you're super involved, feel sorry for her. It's kind of like you're always gone, especially during that year. And it's selfish in that way, because you're pouring out and you're giving of yourself, but you're also, you're absent in many of those ways. You're working all week, and then your weekends are gone. And so, for people to support you, and to support those things that you love, it's amazing to have people in your life that are able to do that. And like my parents, and they're the ones who always want to post things about me, or post, oh, you guys won, or this stuff, and I'm just like, okay, that's fine. But they're proud of you, and it's very, even though I don't like being in that, it's awesome to know that you have that support group and those people that are there.
Yeah, the lesson there is the proverbial, it takes a village. Any coach out there, regardless of whatever you're considering successes, whether you're winning a state title, or you're having one kid go to state, or you're winning conference out, you're putting all conference athletes out there, whatever you're being a success because you're making the positive impact on young people. And we need that more than ever today in 2023. So please know that what you do as a high school track and field coach it's invaluable. It's immeasurable what you do out there. And I think to your point there, Ernest, about that community, you're not alone. That's kind of the weird part of these awards is, again, it's very singular. Ernest Martinez won the National Girls High School Coach of the Year award. However, Ernest Martinez did not do this on his own. He had literally 100 people working together, from your athletes and parents and teachers and assistant coaches, to help culminate in this season. This point I want to stress here is that, in the same vein of any coach that's listening, and Ernest, I'm speaking directly to you, when you feel the weight of all that, you talked about carrying the weight, when you feel that stress and that pressure, that it's all on me, if I don't get this done, if this doesn't happen, if I don't make this happen, etc. Well, that's not true. We have to make sure, for our own mental health, for our longevity. Ernest, I want, you're in year 10-ish, 15-ish, somewhere in that.
Yeah, probably. I think it's 13.
Yeah, so you're in that 13. I want you to be coaching 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, God willing, with health and everything else, right? But to do that, you've got to be able to understand the long term and be able to know that you have people to bounce off of, to help, to envision, etc. So I just love that. That lesson that you gave there about, like, it wasn't me. You were part of it. You're actually absolutely a piece of that puzzle, but it is a puzzle. There are lots and lots of other people that have to be involved to create success for these young people. So, Ernest, man, I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that you won this award to get on the podcast. I mean, to be able to get to know you and your story, to know that you went to Oral Roberts. I mean, come on with the dials, man. It's just so amazing. If you're listening in a couple of weeks, we'll be at the USTFCCCA convention. Ernest will be there to receive his award, which I just know you can't wait to get on stage in front of all those people. Yeah, I know, exactly. But come by. We're excited. We're actually going to do a live podcast there. Again, we did it last year in 2022. We're going to do it in 2023, December 11th at 5:30 p.m. Denver time. So Ernest, if you're there, that's a Monday. If you're there that Monday, I want you to pop by. We just kind of rotate everybody in for 5 minutes. It's real quick, much easier than this gauntlet you've been through today. So, but check us out. I'll have the link down below as well for the URL. If you can't make it to Denver, we'll be live on YouTube. Check us out over there. But Ernest, man, thank you. I know how busy anybody is in any time frame. So for you to take the time to be able to sit down with us for 2 hours, that went by fast for me. I'm not sure about you, but 2 hours and kind of pour your life out, man. It's super valuable. I'm super humbled that you would join us, and I'm just so grateful for not only this year but all the years that you've done and the young people that you've impacted positively, man. Again, it's a bigger goal than just winning a state title. It's the people that you help push out to society that all become moms and dads and business owners and teachers and behavioral scientists. They all become something positively contribute to society because of the impact that you make on them. And so I'm so grateful for you and just so thankful for what you do.
Awesome. Thank you for having me out here, and appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Thank you guys for being here listening. Check us out next week. So we're going to have, we did the girls coach of the year. So it's only fair, right? We're going to have the boys coach of the year next week. Check us out. Come back and we'll do it all over again and have some fun. And then we'll see you in Denver. All right. Have a good day, everybody.